Welcome everyone to the Wisconsin Forum. We have a very special program lined up tonight, and on behalf of the Board of Directors, I thank you all for coming. Before we get to the substance of tonight's meeting, there are a few things that I'd like to mention. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Ryan Law, and I've been on the board for some time. Recently, our president, Judge Rebecca Bradley, felt the need to tender her resignation. She's with us tonight at the head table, though, and we should all congratulate her on her new job as a Wisconsin Circuit Court judge. So, give her a hand. We'll let Becky have a few words here before we get going.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here with all of my Wisconsin Forum friends. It's great to be back. As I'm sure a lot of you know, I had a primary race a couple weeks ago and took 59% of the vote in the county, including, including 54% in the city of Milwaukee, which was a really wonderful, strong showing. And I wanted to thank many people in this room who have been such a great support to me in so many ways. But the battle is not over. The general election is April 2nd, less than 4 weeks away. Just wanted to remind everybody of that and let you know that I'm continuing to work really hard on the campaign trail. You will be hearing me on the radio again very soon, perhaps getting robocalls from me or friends and mailings in the future. So I'm working really hard to ensure that I retain my seat. I love my job. I'm so honored to be serving Milwaukee County in this capacity. And I know you didn't come here to hear me speak, so I will end with that. And it's great to see all of you and hope you enjoy the program tonight.
Okay, so concerning the vacancy on the Wisconsin Forum Board, a vote was had, and I was nominated as the next Forum President. So I hope I serve my position well and make it as relevant as possible for many years to come. Thanks. Thank you. Tonight we have a speaker that is sponsored at the Wisconsin Forum's highest level. Fred Young has been a strong supporter of the Forum in the past, and this year is no different. For those of you who are not familiar with the Forum's membership and sponsorship benefits, I will quickly summarize before Fred will introduce tonight's speaker. To experience the Wisconsin Forum, you have a number of options. You can test the water, so to speak, at the most basic level, and pick an individual speaker you want to see, and call in advance and get a ticket. The cost for this is $50 per individual ticket, or if you are a student or member of clergy, tickets are only $25 a piece. It's a pretty good deal. The next option is a single membership, which allows you one ticket to each of our 5 seasonal events for $195. Doing the math, this is your best value, and if you're a regular attendee, you basically get one for free. Next year, we're going to start something a little new with the membership, kind of add to the basic offerings. We're going to include in the single membership package a digital copy of the recordings of each of the meetings, if you are a full member. This will come on a compact disc, or it will come on like a special zip drive. We're still working out the details on this. This way you can relive all the highlights, or even share recordings with friends or prospective Forum attendees. The next level is the corporate sponsorship level. It's $750 a year. It includes 2 tickets for each meeting. These tickets are transferable to other people if you do need them. They don't need to be you. If you can't make a meeting or whatever, you can call us and say, I've got a friend that would really like to go. That's always a possibility. But the top level sponsorship, which Fred is doing tonight, he's really helping us out on this, is that if you get this level, it's $2,500. You get 8 tickets for that table. You get full membership for the rest of the season. So you can bring a lot of guests. You can help us with board approval, pick the speaker, help bring them in. And if you're at your option, you can introduce the speaker. So I think that that's a pretty good deal. You can really get the message out there. So with this, you should be able to introduce yourself and the speaker and share in making the history of the Wisconsin Forum more colorful and rich in relevancy and content. We hope that all of you, both members and guests, enjoy tonight's program. Without you, we would not be able to fulfill our mission to advance the cause of liberty and learn that ideas have consequences. Let's all give tonight's sponsor, Fred Young, a warm welcome.
I want to start by saying you ought to see the other guy. It's a pleasure to welcome Randall O'Toole back to Wisconsin, where he's been an authoritative ally in our fight against uneconomic transportation proposals, including Madison Light Rail, KRM, the Milwaukee to Madison High-Speed Rail, and now the streetcar. My having been an activist in opposing KRM commuter rail, and as a board member of Randall's employer, the Cato Institute, I've had the pleasure of hearing hearing and reading Randall's work on many occasions. He's knowledgeable, passionate, prolific, and entertaining. And believe it or not, he really likes trains. His profile on Cato's website identifies Randall as a senior fellow working on urban growth, public land, and transportation issues. The author of several books, 3 in the last 5 years alone, one of which is the best laid plans, in which Randall calls for repealing federal, state, and local planning laws and proposes reforms to help solve social and environmental problems without heavy-handed government regulation. His list of publications includes a critique of KRM in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel entitled Cost Outweighs Benefits. He's written for many other organizations, including USA Today, New York Times, Huffington Post, National Review, Wall Street Journal, and many local papers. You get the message. Recent appearances include CNN's Anderson Cooper 360, where he discussed high-speed rail, and last year he discussed trolleys in Milwaukee on Charlie Sykes' show. Others that he has appeared on C-SPAN, Fox, PBS, NPR, and many local stations. In addition to making product for Cato, he wrote a scholarly 25-page, with I think 39 references, footnotes, very, very scholarly, special report that was published by the McIver Institute last year. It's called The Streetcar Scam, and we've got copies of the executive summary of that document at the back table or outside in the hall, if you care to take a copy with you, just one page. Brett Healy, the president of McIver, who published it, is at the head table. Would you stand, Brett, and just be recognized? Been a leader in this fight. At McIver's website, there's a link to the Americans for Prosperity, AFP Wisconsin website, which is called A Streetcar Named Desire, and contains related materials, including a petition against the streetcar here in Milwaukee. AFP Wisconsin's President Luke Hilgeman is here this evening. Would you stand, Luke? Recognized? Randall appeared in a press conference at City Hall, I believe, this morning with Alderman Bob Donovan on the Milwaukee Streetcar project. The alderman and his wife are at the head table. Would you please stand, Bob, and be recognized? And during the Q&A period, if you care to make a comment or two, Bob, we'd certainly welcome that. We know you've been a leader. This morning, some of you may have heard Randall on the Charlie Sykes radio program in the 9 o'clock hour, and then again with Vicki McKenna at the 11 o'clock hour, again discussing the trolley here in town. Also at the head table is Rick Essenberg, president of Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, which served as counsel for Brett, who I believe personally sued the Public Utility Commission in order to get them to make a decision on whether or not Milwaukee or We Energies would have to pay for the relocation of utilities that are on the proposed streetcar route. And want to thank you for that, and would you stand, Rick, and just be recognized? It is with both pride and with pleasure that I invite you to welcome Randall O'Toole.
Well, thank you very much. It's always nice to be back in Wisconsin. I've been here several times, and I'd come from Oregon. You've probably seen some of my pictures of trains here. At least a few of them are of trains in Oregon. I'm very proud of where I live, and yet wherever I go, I find places that are beautiful, that are wonderful, and I wouldn't mind living there, I tell myself, although so far I haven't been attracted out of Oregon yet, or maybe pushed out. They're trying. I want to talk to you about transportation issues in general, but really focusing on the streetcar, and the streetcar is kind of a symbol of all that's wrong with transportation policy in the United States today. I am, as Fred said, a rail nut. In fact, I sometimes think that's my title at Cato. I helped restore this steam locomotive, which is the second most powerful operating steam locomotive in the world. The first job I ever had 44 years ago was helping to restore the streetcar that was installed in the very first spaghetti factory in Portland, Oregon. There's now spaghetti factories all over the country, but the first one was in Portland, and I helped restore that streetcar. Streetcars, even by then, were totally obsolete. 100 years ago, more than 800 American cities had streetcars, and one by one, they switched to buses because buses made a lot more sense. When streetcars were first developed in the 1880s, they had an average speed of about 6 to 8 miles an hour. Then in the 1890s, we saw the first automobiles. They had an average speed of about 6 to 8 miles an hour. Now here we are, more than 100 years later, and we routinely drive at 75 or 80 miles an hour. We don't like to brag about driving at 80 miles an hour, but a lot of us do. Meanwhile, the so-called modern streetcar still goes at 6 to 8 miles an hour. That's how much streetcar technology has advanced in 125 years. Now, when they talk about streetcars, everybody talks about Portland, which is my former hometown. I was raised there. I lived almost half my life there. I hope I never have to go back. A reporter for the Oregonian decided to test the urban myth that you can actually walk faster than a streetcar. And he found out, lo and behold, it's not a myth. You can walk faster than the streetcar, and he even gave the streetcar an advantage. He said the streetcar comes by every 10 minutes, and you don't know the schedule. They just go by every 10 minutes. So the average person is to go out and stand on the corner and wait for 5 minutes. So he could have said, I'm going to start walking 5 minutes before the next streetcar, but no, he waited until the streetcar caught up with his corner, and then he walked 1.7 miles and still managed to beat the streetcar. So that's the advanced technology they want to introduce to Milwaukee. Now, by the time I was restoring that streetcar in this old spaghetti factory, all but 6 American cities had converted their streetcars to buses. And those 6, basically Cleveland, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Boston, and San Francisco, all but 5 of those have since converted them to light rail, which is a little bit higher technology. So we've only got one historic streetcar system left, and that's in New Orleans. Now, the reason why they converted them is because streetcars were very expensive. They're expensive to maintain, expensive to run, and very inflexible. If you wanted to expand with your growth of your urban areas, it was very expensive to build new lines. Buses were cheap. They used existing infrastructure. They shared infrastructure with cars. And they were very flexible. And so buses became the dominant transit mode. And in fact, cities that saw streetcars convert to buses weren't sad about it. They were overjoyed. The commuters felt like the buses were far better than the streetcars. They were very happy to see it. Today we're seeing cities like Milwaukee want to build streetcars again. And I consider it kind of a test of urban IQ. Do you really think that a 6 to 8 mile an hour low capacity transit system is going to make a difference for your city when you've got all kinds of problems like crime and poor schools and blight and so on and so forth? Is a 6 to 8 mile an hour transit line that can't get out of its own way going to solve the problems? Well, let's just look at some of the numbers. There's about 7 cities that have some form of a streetcar line today. Portland and Tacoma have what's called modern streetcars. Most of the others have vintage streetcars. They still operate the same way, but the streetcars look older. And you can compare the cost of operating the streetcars with the cost of operating the buses in those same cities. And in every single city, streetcar costs are far higher, generally 2 to 4 times greater per vehicle mile or per vehicle hour, which means it costs a lot more just to operate them. And that would be all right if the streetcars attracted 2 to 4 times as many people, but in almost every case, the streetcars actually carry fewer people than the buses. The only 2 exceptions are Tacoma and Portland. Now, what's different about Tacoma and Portland? Well, I already told you part of it. They have the so-called modern streetcar, but the other difference is it's free. The Tacoma streetcar is free, and the Portland streetcar until September 1st was free on about 80% of its route. So the fares that they collected in Portland averaged 4 cents per ride. So it's almost free, whereas these other streetcars are charging $1 or $1.50, the same as the bus, and they don't get as many passengers as the bus. So the myth that people will ride rails and they won't ride buses is simply not true. Now, when you combine the two together, when you say that what's the ridership compared to the cost per hour, then you get the cost per passenger mile. You can see in every case it costs a lot more to move somebody a passenger mile by streetcar than it does by bus. And again, this is only operating cost. This doesn't even count the amortized capital cost, which is far greater with streetcars. You can buy a bus for $300,000 to $700,000. The streetcars prices start at $2 million, more like $4 million just for the vehicle. And then, of course, there's the $30 million a mile it takes to build them. And that's $30 million a track mile. When Portland built its first light rail line, it cost less than $15 million per route mile. That's 2 track miles. And even adjusting for inflation, that's less than $30 million per route mile. So streetcars are costing twice as much as light rail was costing when we were first starting to build light rail in this country. And streetcars aren't efficient either. They aren't environmentally sound. Streetcars, on average in this country, are among the worst environmental polluters among various forms of transit. Only ferry boats are worse than streetcars. You can see Portland is not too bad. It's almost free, of course, but it's about the same as a car. You're not saving any energy getting people out of their cars and onto the streetcar because Portland's actually about the same or a little worse. Tacoma's is worse than an SUV. All the rest of them are worse than an SUV with only 1 occupant. So streetcars are not efficient, they are not greenhouse gas friendly, and in fact, since most of the electricity generated for streetcars comes from burning coal or other fossil fuels, they actually do more greenhouse gases than the alternatives. Do streetcars reduce congestion? No, streetcars increase congestion. They displace more space on the road, they displace more automobiles from the road than they take automobiles off the road by getting people to ride the streetcar instead of driving. You can look at the environmental analyses that have been done for other streetcar lines around the country, and they've actually quantified it and showed that for every car taken off the road, generally 2 or 3 cars are displaced by the streetcar, so they end up with far worse congestion. They didn't bother to quantify it for the Milwaukee streetcar proposal, but they did say, oh, it might actually lead to more congestion. Yes, might, as if you mean absolutely certain, yes, it will increase congestion. It will increase safety problems, especially if you're a cyclist. You don't want to be cycling and get your wheel caught in the groove for the streetcar. There's another hidden cost of streetcars. I've talked about the cost of operation, I've talked about the cost of construction, but then there's maintenance. Now, the transit industry has a neat trick. According to generally accepted accounting principles, maintenance is an operating cost. It should be counted as a part of operating your system. But they count it as a capital cost. What that means is they pretend it doesn't count. And so they ignore it completely. Now, maintenance really becomes an issue when your rail system gets to be about 30 years old. The rails are worn out, the ties are worn out, the electrical facilities are worn out, the stations are worn out, and of course the vehicles are completely worn out. Everything has to be replaced. The Federal Transit Administration published a report recently that said America's rail transit systems have a $60 billion maintenance backlog. The Chicago CTA, the Boston MBTA, the Washington Metro system are particularly in dire straits. They are virtually on the verge of collapse because they haven't been maintaining them. If you fly into O'Hare and take the CTA to downtown, you'll be going for part of your route at 6 miles an hour because they don't dare go any faster because the tracks are so poorly maintained. Washington, D.C. had a big wreck a few years ago, killed 9 people. It was due to maintenance failures. They just hadn't maintained the signals. The signals stopped working. A train ran into another train. If you spend any time in Washington, you know they have almost weekly problems with broken rails, with cars falling apart onto the railroad tracks, with smoke filling up the tunnels, with broken elevators and escalators. And in some of the stations in Washington, a broken escalator can be a big problem because it's 4 or 5 stories underneath the ground. So they just don't have the money to maintain it, and yet they're building more. Now, some people say that, and that you hear this over and over again among proponents for streetcars, is that streetcars are high-capacity transit. A single streetcar has room for a lot more people than a single bus, they say. So therefore, if you need to move a lot of people, streetcars are a better way of doing it. Well, it turns out that's simply not true. The modern streetcars that they're using in Portland and Tacoma have 30 seats on board. That means everybody beyond those 30 seats has to stand. Now, a typical bus, a 40-foot bus, has 40 seats. The 30-seat streetcar is 66 feet long, so it's more than 50% longer. It's taking up much more space on the street, and it has fewer seats. Now, Portland says that its streetcars has room for 125 people standing. That's what, in the transit industry, they call crush capacity. This is crush capacity in Tokyo. Americans won't stand for that. Tacoma is much more reasonable. They say they only have room for 25 people standing. But let's be generous and say there's room for 70 people standing, 30 people sitting. That's 100 people per streetcar. Then the next question is, how frequent are the streetcars? For safety reasons, these streetcars are really, really heavy, and you don't want them banging into each other. So for safety reasons, they're kept 3 minutes apart. That's 20 streetcars an hour. Do the math. 20 streetcars times 100 people per streetcar is 2,000 people an hour. Now, just for comparison, light rail capacities depend on the length of your city block. Portland city blocks are only 200 feet long. A single light rail car is 100 feet, so you can only run them in pairs. A single car can hold about 150 people, so that means a pair holds 300. Most cities have blocks 3 cars long, 300 feet long. So assuming 3-car trains, light rail can carry about 9,000 people an hour. That's high capacity. Well, it turns out the word light in light rail means light capacity transit. It doesn't mean lightweight. Light rail cars are actually heavier than heavy rail cars. They use the same weight of rail. It means light capacity because you can't move that many people per hour. What about buses? Well, buses, as I said, typically have 40 seats. They have room for about 25 people standing. And a single bus stop can serve about 40 buses an hour. In Portland, we have downtown one-way streets where they stagger the bus stops every 2 blocks. There's 4 bus stops every 2 blocks, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, which means in a 2-block zone, you can serve 160 buses an hour. That means you can actually move more people by bus than you can by light rail. And Portland, when they decided to build light rail downtown, they built it on the bus mall, and they actually reduced the capacity of the bus mall to carry commuters. Now, I'm talking about single-decker buses, but now there are American manufacturers making double-decker buses that have 85 seats, and they have room for 25 or so people standing. They are, again, are only 40 feet long. They're just as nimble. They don't take up any more space than a 40-foot bus, which means a single 40-foot bus can carry 105 people or more, or 110 people or more, whereas, remember, the streetcar was 100. And since you can run them more frequently, you can run 18,000 people an hour. That's high-capacity transit. Subways are higher capacity, but if you start running buses on freeways, you can push that up to 30 or 40,000 people an hour. If you need high-capacity transit, buses are your solution. If you don't need high-capacity transit, buses are your solution because they're a lot cheaper than other low-capacity transit, like streetcars. Now, what your city leaders have been telling you is that they went to Portland, and they learned that in Portland, they built a streetcar line, and they got billions of dollars of economic development. And so if Milwaukee builds a streetcar line, you'll get billions of dollars of economic development too. Economic development has become the justification for the streetcar fad that's sweeping across America. And it's written right in their documents. This is from the applications for federal funding for streetcars in these 5 cities. The applications clearly showed that if you didn't generate any new economic development, the benefits were only about 1/5 of the costs. It's only when they claimed that economic development was generated by the streetcars that the benefits were greater than the costs. Now, it just seems peculiar to me to think that a 2-mile long, 6 to 8 mile an hour transit line it only carries a few thousand people a day, is going to generate billions of dollars of economic development. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. The head of the Federal Transit Administration, Peter Rogoff, was appointed to his job by President Obama, is in the running to become the next Secretary of Transportation. He actually spoke at a conference 2 years ago, and he said, why are cities who can't afford to maintain the trains they've got coming to us and asking for money to build more trains? You know something, cities? Paint is cheap, rails are expensive. Why don't you just go take a bus, paint it a special color, and call it a special bus, and you'll get as many new passengers as if you build a rail line. He said there's a lot of cities that should be considering that aren't considering that. And that's absolutely true. Let's look at Milwaukee. Here's a kind of a abstract description of Milwaukee's proposed streetcar line, 2-point-something miles long, $64 million plus utility costs, which is going to bring it up to $100 million or so. And they say that's going to generate economic development. What if instead of having a streetcar coming by every 10 minutes, we funneled a dozen bus lines down that corridor in both directions. And we ran each individual bus line every 15 minutes all day long, or at least during rush hour, which means with a dozen lines, they'd be coming by every 75 seconds. So if you want to get from one end of this urban core area to another, you just go out and you wait 75 seconds at most, and a bus comes by. And if you want to go farther, you just wait for the bus that's going farther, and you get on that bus. It'll come by every 15 minutes. That's a lot cheaper than the streetcar system. It's a lot more useful. And if streetcars do provide any economic development benefits, which as I will show you in a minute, is dubious, certainly a bus system that's running much more frequently and goes to far more places will do even better. Now, the claims that streetcars generate economic development come from my former hometown of Portland. Now, Portland first built its light rail line in, that's not Portland. That's actually Moscow, Russia. Whenever I see a red and white light rail train in front of an ugly apartment building, I think it's Portland. Here's the one in Portland. I should have known the difference because you can see in Portland it's raining and in Moscow it's sunny. Anyway, I don't want to say that nobody rides the light rail in Portland, but one day a train came into downtown Portland with only one passenger on board. Now, coyotes like to go where they know they can find solitude from people. Now, here's the thing. Portland had an all-bus system like Milwaukee in 1980. And at that time, almost 10% of all Portland area commuters took transit to work. Since then, Portland has built 5 light rail lines, a commuter rail line, and a streetcar line. And today, thanks to all of this rail transit, the percentage of commuters taking transit to work has grown all the way up to 8%, from 9.8%. So, transit has not really helped. This is 2007? By 2011, it was up to 8%, but didn't have that on here. When they built the first light rail line, they zoned everything along the line for what they call transit-oriented development. That's high-density, mixed-use development. 10 years later, this is what they got. Nothing. They got no new development. And the city planners went to the city council and said, we're not getting it. We need to do something about this. And one of the members of the city council, whose name was Charlie Hales, said, this doesn't make any sense. You look at the map, and all the vacant land in the Portland area is right along the light rail line. We need to do something about this. So what did they do? Instead of changing their zoning and letting people build what they wanted, they decided to subsidize it. So they used tax increment finance districts around every light rail line in Portland and offered developers hundreds of millions of dollars. The numbers on here, the subsidies in hundreds of millions of dollars, or millions of dollars for each tax increment finance district. And that's just the tax increment finance subsidies. They also gave a variety of other subsidies as well. So here's downtown Portland. You can see there's 4 tax increment finance districts on the north side of the river. When they designed the first streetcar line, they ran it through 3 of those districts and offered developers essentially $600 million in tax increment finance money, plus at least $200 million in other subsidies, $800 million in all, to build along that line. And Charlie Hales, the city councilor, said, it's a myth to think that we'll get into development. We need to have the subsidies. Now, as soon as the streetcar was done, he quit his job in the middle of his term and went to work for a consulting firm called HDR and started traveling around the country selling streetcars to other cities, telling them, we built a streetcar line for $50 million and we got $1 billion in development. He never mentioned the fact that they gave developers $800 million in subsidies to get that $1 billion in development. Portland has put out a publication called Development-Oriented Transit about the streetcar line. Now, it's curious, there's one part of the streetcar line that doesn't go into a tax increment finance district. Here's the streetcar line that's red dots on here, and we can see this one part is in a tax increment finance district called the River District, popularly known as the Pearl District. This was a railroad yard. The city spent well over $200 million tearing out the tracks, tearing down obsolete buildings, putting in new sewer and water, putting in new streets, putting in some parks, and they got development. They're proud to say, we built the streetcar line and we got a Whole Foods, for example. They don't mention that right around the corner from a Whole Foods is a city-built parking lot for the Whole Foods. In fact, there's parking garages all over the length up and down the streetcar line to serve all the businesses that were built there supposedly because of the streetcar line. In total, in the Pearl District, they got $1.3 billion of development, more than 50 projects, an average of $26 million a project because of the streetcar line or because of the hundreds of millions of dollars in other subsidies. Well, let's look outside the Pearl District. This is northwest Portland. It's about the same amount of land, about 70 acres of land, both in the Pearl District and in northwest Portland. No subsidies to northwest Portland. According to Development-Oriented Transit, they got 7 projects worth a total of $17 million or $2.5 million a project. One of those projects went bankrupt after 5 years. It was a local gym that had been built and nobody wanted to use it, so it went bankrupt. This is basically what northwest Portland looks like. It has not been redeveloped because it didn't get any subsidies. But the streetcar is there. The streetcar did not generate any subsidies. What instead happened is very curious. Where they did subsidize development, they mandated mixed-use development. Residences plus other uses, commercial, retail, whatever. So they got a lot of new downtown residences. Those downtown residents don't take the streetcar because it's slow. Instead, they bicycle and walk. And so what we've seen is, since the streetcar was built, a huge surge in bicycling and walking to work, and transit ridership has actually declined. Not just percentage-wise, but the number of people taking transit to work in downtown Portland has actually declined, thanks to the streetcar, or really thanks to the subsidies to the residential development along the streetcar line. Now, the residents of Milwaukee will be thrilled to know that the real source of economic development in Portland is beer. In 1980, the first microbrew pub in America was opened in downtown Portland. By 1990, there were a dozen of them. Today, there's 50. Portland is the microbrew pub capital of the world. And it's the microbrew pubs, not transit, that have made downtown Portland a lively place. It's just as lively at night as it is in the daytime. It's just as busy on Sundays as it is on weekdays because of the brew pubs, not because of transit. Transit has nothing to do with it. Now, when Portland built its first streetcar line, it built it with its own money, used tax increment finance money to pay for the streetcar, as well as all the other subsidies. But then it asked for the federal government for money to build a second line. The federal government has a Buy America requirement. So the city paid $2 million each to a company in the Czech Republic to build these streetcars. But to get one built in the United States, it gave $7 million. Of course, it was free federal money. $7 million to a company in Lake Oswego, Oregon, that's a suburb of Portland, to build a single streetcar. After $7 million, it still didn't work. The Czech-made streetcars go at 45 miles an hour top speed, but the Oregon-built streetcar goes at the top speed is 25 miles an hour. And they signed a contract to build 6 more streetcars for $20 million. And the company arbitrarily announced one day that it was only going to build 5 more streetcars for $20 million. But don't worry, you're not getting less, you're getting more, they said. Yes, well, 5 is still less than 6, and 25 miles an hour is still less than 45 miles an hour, so I don't know how you're getting more. Portland's infatuation with rail transit has left the city in dire financial straits, and it shows up all over the city. The city's pension fund is only 50% funded. That's worse than every state in the country. It's worse than all but 3 other cities in the country. The city's health care fund is only 4% funded. The city schools are in terrible shape. Oregon has the 4th worst high school graduation rate in the country. Even when you adjust for income, we're worse than average. Portland brings down the Oregon average. Portland is significantly lower high school graduation rates than the rest of Oregon. So if it weren't for Portland being so low, we wouldn't be the 4th worst in the country. Our streets are falling apart. Streets are the largest asset Portland owns, and yet they are not maintaining them. They have no plans to fix any potholes or pave them or anything like that because they're too busy building streetcar lines and bike paths. City office buildings are only getting half the money they need to be maintained in a state of good repair. And the transit system itself is suffering. Last year they made 12% cuts to transit service. They decided to start charging for the streetcar and other downtown buses. A couple of years ago, all transit was free downtown. Now it all costs money because they couldn't afford to run it anymore. And the head of the transit agency says by 2020, we're going to have to cut service by 70%. But they're still spending hundreds of millions of dollars building new streetcar lines, $1.5 billion on a 7-mile-long light rail line, and they're trying to force the state of Washington into paying to build a light rail line into Vancouver, Washington, which is going to cost another $1 billion or so. So they can't afford to run what they've got, but they still want to build more. Now the irony is, if you look at private transportation, we see instead of building all kinds of infrastructure that they can't afford to operate, the fastest growing mode of private transportation is intercity buses. They're growing twice as fast as Amtrak, growing much faster than airlines or anything else, and it's because of the megabus model. The megabus model says we don't have stations, we don't have ticket salesmen, we don't have baggage handlers, we just have buses. They stop at the curb, they pick you up. The buses have Wi-Fi on board. They've got leather seats. They're very comfortable. Every seat has 2 plug-ins, so you can plug in your iPods or your iPads or your iMacs or whatever. And they're very successful. They operate in many corridors. They operate more frequently with faster service than Amtrak, with lower fares, without Amtrak subsidies. Why, then, are cities so interested in streetcars and rail transit in general? It's simple. In 1991, Congress created a multi-billion-dollar annual pot of money. And instead of the way we distribute highway funds is by a formula, each state gets so much money based on their land area and population and things like that. Instead of using a formula, it was first come, first served. And the cities that came out with an efficient transit proposal got a little bit of money. The cities that came out with the wackiest, most expensive, most ridiculous transit proposals got the biggest amount of money. So, of course, they were all going to be wacky as possible. Well, Mary Peters, the Secretary of Transportation under George Bush, decided to put a brake to this. Not a full stop, but to slow it down. She implemented a rule that said, if you want to build a streetcar line, you have to show that it's more cost-effective than buses. If you want to build a light rail line, you have to also meet some cost-effectiveness criteria. So Ray LaHood, our current Secretary of Immobility, got into office and he said, I'm going to take away that rule because I want to build streetcars everywhere. So last January, just 2 months ago, a new rule was established. It goes into effect on April 1st. It says, to build a streetcar line, you only have to show that it costs money. That's their definition of cost effectiveness, that it costs money. You don't have to show that it's more cost effective than anything else because you don't have to consider any other alternatives. You don't even have to count the cost. You just have to show that it costs money. As I say, this came out in January. I'm hoping that we can challenge it. Whatever city is this first city that puts in an application under that, I think that's the opportunity to challenge it, and I'm hoping that we can put some effort together to do that. Now, this isn't a typical audience, but in a lot of audiences I'm asked, well, if not rail transit, then what? What should we do instead? Well, what we should do instead is being done by Google, by... Oh, excuse me. By Google, by Volkswagen, by a number of other car companies. They're developing driverless cars. This is a Google driverless car. I've actually had an opportunity to ride in it in Washington, D.C. The car can see pedestrians. It can detect every traffic light on the road. They've got a database of all the traffic laws on every single street, wherever they drive the car. They can go around corners. They can go at night. They can go anytime. They've driven this driverless car in California over 300,000 miles, and they only had one accident when somebody rear-ended them at a stoplight. The state of Nevada is the first state to legalize driverless cars, and Google was the first company to get a license for a driverless car, and so far there have been 3 other companies that have got licenses for driverless cars. By 2018 or so, you will be able to buy driverless cars. And the benefits will be enormous. First of all, because driverless cars have computer reflexes and not human reflexes, will triple road capacities, at least. So we won't need to be building a lot more roads. Our existing roads will have a lot more capacity. We'll have universal mobility. It doesn't matter if you're 9 years old or 90 years old. It doesn't matter whether you've got a driver's license or not. You'll be able to get in the car, and all you have to do is say, take me to grandma's house, take me to the store, take me to work, and it'll do it. Congestion will be a thing of the past. It'll be a lot faster. It'll be a lot safer. And it'll be greener because we'll be able to build the cars for at a lot lighter, because we won't have to include a lot of the safety equipment that are included in cars today. Now here's a feature that Volkswagen has developed that they say will be available soon. It's called the valet car. You drive up to work or to a hotel or whatever, get out of the car and you say, "Car, go park yourself." And the car has a database in it of all available parking places. It drives around until it finds a free parking place, and then it parks there. And then when you're done, you come out, you pull out your smartphone, and you say, "Car, come." And the car will start itself up and come pick you up. Now, if you don't want to pay for parking, then what you do is you say to your car, "Car, go get an oil change," or "Car, go rent yourself out to somebody else who wants to use a car for a while." And we won't have zip cars anymore, because everybody's car will be a zip car if you don't mind other people using your car. Now, this sounds incredible, and yet you can buy cars today that have 95% of the technology of the driverless car. The Ford Fusion right now is the most moderately priced car that comes with this technology, including adaptive cruise control, which the car monitors the car in front of you and mimics its behavior, keeps exactly the same speed as the car in front of you. Lane keep, which recognizes the stripes on the roads and steers for you between the stripes. Collision avoidance and other kinds of technologies are available. So cars are going to get to be a lot safer. And when as few as 20% of cars on the road have some of these technologies, half of our congestion is going to go away, because a lot of congestion is just due to slow human reflexes and not to anything else. Now, I talk about all of these issues except the streetcar, which wasn't an issue when I was writing the book, in my book Gridlock, which was published by the Cato Institute in 2010. And I did hopefully bring a few copies of the book with me if you want one. Cato is offering them for $25.95. Honesty compels me to tell you that Amazon will sell it to you for $17. Just to make it easy to make change, I'm selling them for $20, but what you get tonight is my autograph. If you don't want to spend $20, you can go to the McIver Institute and download the Streetcar Scam, or you can go to the Cato Institute and download the Great Streetcar Conspiracy, both of which were published last summer. You can also go to my blog, which is called The Anti-Planner. I am the Anti-Planner. If you Google Anti-Planner, I'm the first thing on the list. I'm also, with Eileen Bruskowitz, who's in the audience here, helped start a group called the American Dream Coalition, and we have an annual conference about these issues, and the next conference is going to focus on transportation, and it's going to be in Washington, D.C. on April 27 through 29 of this year. We get transportation experts from all over the country, and even a few from other countries, to talk about the latest in technologies. We get political experts to talk about how we're going to win, how we're going to deal with these issues as they come up. Congress is going to be revisiting federal transportation policy in 2014, so this conference will be an opportunity to have some influence on that. You can go to these websites. TI.org is the Anti-Planner, Cato.org, McIverInstitute.com, and AmericanDreamCoalition.org, and you can also email me at rot@ti.org, Cato.org, or AmericanDreamCoalition.org if you like typing a lot. Now, I also was going to close this show with the Simpsons monorail song, but they don't have a good PA system, so I'm going to skip that. If you want to listen to the monorail song later, I'll be glad to play it for you. The story is that the town of Springfield got some extra money in their budget, and so they held this town meeting to decide what to do with it, and Marge Simpson said, well, the streets are all cracked and broken. Why don't we pave all the streets? And they about were ready to agree on that, and some guy from the back of the room said, well, what about building a monorail? And people started singing the song about the monorail. It was from the Music Man. And by the end of the song, everybody voted for it. And Marge says, but Main Street's still all cracked and broken. And Bart says, sorry, Mom, the mob has spoken. So if you don't get a chance to listen to it tonight, go home and listen to it on YouTube if you haven't heard it already.